Please help me welcome Executive Director of Strategic Support, Ms. Sandra Stoddard.
There is no silver bullet, and that's the whole thing about empowerment. If there's a one size that fits all, that is not what empowerment is. So there isn't going to be a silver bullet, but there are going to be things that you say, oh, that might work for us because that fits our culture. That won't work for us because it won't fit our culture. So I think that's a real important concept. Remember that there always is calibration. So whatever you try when you leave here, whatever systems change happens, remember that it's not going to be right the first time. And that an empowered school district listens and it gets feedback and it continually modifies and changes. And make sure that as it moves forward, it is adjusting based on the context. So further context, who are we? Edmonton Public Schools is the second largest school district in Alberta, but we organize our schools into catchment areas where 50 schools report to an assistant superintendent, but they are grouped according to feeders. So elementaries that feed into junior highs, that feed into high schools, all work collaboratively together. Foundational to Edmonton Public Schools, we do offer 30 alternative programs in our district, including visual and performing arts, athletics, faith-based programs, languages, cultural philosophies. We have community schools are the first guaranteed point of entry for all of our students. But within that concept of choice, inclusion isn't the only option. We also provide options with 18 other specialized supports and services that if parents wish to have a more specialized placement for their child, then we do accommodate that. So I'm going to start off with everybody, probably, if they don't already know, Michael Stravitsky. And he was our superintendent for more than 20-some years. And I know he's known for, being the founder, the guru of site-based decision-making. But when Michael Stravitsky came in, his vision wasn't just about site-based decision-making. It really was about an empowered organization. But some of the big ideas that came from Mike was that concept of site-based decision-making. That idea that he had a clear idea of what the results were that he wanted to achieve, but he said, you know what, my results are your process. I don't care how you get there, you just need to get there. He really founded the notion of principal as decision maker. He was very much a believer in stakeholder involvement and decision making, and really moved forward a balance between accountability but also flexibility. So some of the lessons learned, I'll tell you as a principal, even as a teacher, I felt empowered. We were empowered to plan collaboratively with our staffs. Empowerment in site-based decision-making isn't about giving the dollars to the school principal and then having them decide. It was about creating that culture of empowerment. And it really was about core services as well. Not all the dollars under Mike went out to the schools. There were some that were centrally located, and that was based on an ability to provide core services like professional development in a balanced and equitable way across schools. One of the accountability processes that was in place around site-based decision-making, students were always at the core. Priorities, our district has core priorities that guide decision-making, but each school and decision unit with their dollars was required to align to what the 3 priorities would be. And they were responsible for establishing a plan for how they were going to get there and measures for how they were going to demonstrate success. Didn't have to look the same, but they had to be in place. And then, after a plan was developed, we were encouraged to do our budget planning. Very different way of doing things, plan and then allocate. Our next superintendent was Emery Dosdell. And he came in 1995. And so foundational site-based decision-making and all of the ideas that Mike put in place, he shifted things a little bit. Parental choice was one of his big ideas. He flattened the organization. So he took out, we had a layer of assistant superintendents, and he wanted all of the schools to report directly to him. He really viewed principals as a CEO and an entrepreneur in their buildings, and he pushed even more dollars out. So half of our central office was cost recovery basis, so they had to get their money back to be fully operating, and others weren't. Some of the outcomes that were achieved as a result of that is that public education did become a big tent. We don't have, as I mentioned earlier, charters and a lot of charters and charters and private schools. There was a further shift to decentralization, which really started out as a franchise, kind of approach to education. There was, he started something called Quantum Leap, which he encouraged every principal in schools to do projects. As our school district now grows and we have population increases, that open boundaries is becoming a challenge for us. It did result in empowered parents, which is absolutely where we needed to go. That's probably one of the best outcomes that came out of this, is an empowerment of parents because they're part of an empowered school district. It did empower our principals. They felt like they were part of the central executive team. But I'm going to say an unintended consequence of that was that there was that middle management that was missing, and we started to see 202 schools off in their own direction. There was a lot of risk-taking, and you need a culture of risk-taking. You need people to be able to look at their data, try things, and if it fails, not feel like they're going to be punished for it. If they can demonstrate that they tried something, that is a culture of risk-taking. But one of the challenges was we didn't put structures, or at that point in time, it was try anything. And if you don't have a way of measuring it or evaluating it, you can very quickly become a bandwagon. So then we moved to Angus Macbeth, who was our superintendent from 2000 to 2005. His shift, and I think it was getting back to don't just do bandwagon, don't just try things, focus on what you know is going to make a difference. Focus on student achievement, focus on what research says are best practices for improvement. He really shifted the concept of principal as entrepreneur, as principal as instructional leader. But some of the outcomes is that we did start to see data-driven accountability again. Teachers were building collaboration teams. They were doing instructional walkthroughs, instructional talkthroughs, getting schools across the district working collaboratively together. And so we started to see that isolation decrease and a culture of collaboration really emerging around what's important for kids. We started to see a greater standardization of process, but we started to feel top down. My results, my process. What happened was that great idea, and it was working and empowering, but then they started to say, but everybody needs to do it like this. Started to create a culture that became one of mistrust. We had so many years of being empowered, to do it our own way and hold tight to whatever those overarching, non-negotiables were. This was foreign to us as a district, and people started to go underground, and people started to push back. And it wasn't the right intention. Everybody that leads makes decisions that they think are the best. Research says this, so we're going to ensure that everybody does this. But it did start to create the beginning of a toxic culture. Some of the things that happened during that time that were an impetus, and this came from our provincial government, is we had what started to create that culture of testing and trying things and focused on improvement was AC. And you'll notice that a significant amount of dollars were allocated across the province. 38 million the first year, 66 million in year two, and then similar amounts of money each year. And it was really about helping school districts create a culture of continuous improvement and really empowering them to improve student learning based on local initiatives. So that was also an impetus that superintendent grabbed hold of that helped to create the culture at that time. So then we move into our second last superintendent, and that was Edgar Schmidt. And Edgar Schmidt, really his big ideas were that everybody's in. And he really focused on creating an inclusive environment and education system so that every child, no matter their skills, their abilities, their aspirations, would find success in Edmonton Public Schools. And his big focus, in addition to inclusion, was about community engagement. And so you'll see we're starting to shift around empowerment. We went from principals to teachers to to parents, to community, recognizing that collectively, again, we have that ownership for public education. When we started to notice that our culture had shifted to one of being toxic, again, we went back to empower and engage people. Bring them together, find out what's working, find out what's not working, and make decisions based on their input. And so that was a real significant thing that needed to happen in our district, and we intentionally brought people together to try to figure out how do we shift it back to where we want to be. What his idea was is to put child well-being at the center, and to wrap around, support surround a child and work in an integrated fashion to make sure that the success of the child was actually accomplished. I, at that point in time, was a principal in a very high poverty area. And so it started to shift the way we thought about how we work with our students. And some of the things that we were, when you have a focus on community engagement that we accomplished is we had a mentor coordinator, and we had, in one of our schools, we had 168 one-on-one mentors for students that needed that one-on-one relationship. And so we couldn't offer that kind of in-depth, but the community could. And we found big brothers and big sisters that said, we'll join you. We had a family support worker and also a family therapist that was funded from health and children and youth services. And they came in and they worked with families, to help support them in educating their child. We also had a mental health nurse. That was the power of site-based decision-making. I needed that in that building, and I could target my resources to bring in a mental health nurse to work with kids of trauma. We had a hot lunch and breakfast program, and at the very core of it was we had a team that believed in working in partnership to help students and be successful. We are down to our current superintendent, and that is Daryl Robertson. And some of the shifts that his big ideas is really about being a values-driven organization. And so we have worked hard to live and breathe our values of equity, collaboration, integrity, and accountability throughout our district. He really, again, is about that social capital, believing that diversity in thought and perspective and opinion is necessary in trying to figure out how we move forward. And so engaging those people that can come together to collectively work around outcomes for kids. He really shifted his principle as community leader, being out there, working with the community, finding out what the needs and the aspirations and desires are, using that to inform us in our plans for moving forward and some of the issues that are challenging to us. He really believes in strategic planning, and that's part of my role and responsibility. But we've taken now priorities that always have governed us, we've got vision, priorities, mission, values, as well as a very targeted strategic plan.
David Frazier, and like Sandra, he is a top leader in the Edmonton School District as the Executive Director for Operations and his insights on change leadership.
I joined Edmonton Public Schools in November 1990 as a consultant in human resources. I started the day before our support staff went on strike. This meant that I became a full-time data entry clerk for almost a month. When I wasn't entering data, I was on the phone with my former employer trying to get my old job back or looking for a new job. Fortunately for me, none of that worked out. When the strike ended, I hugged our support staff when they returned to data entry. Part of it was great to have them back. Part of it was I no longer had to do data entry. But mostly it was because I did not know how they could possibly do their job without poking their eyes out with hot sticks. They were working on an antediluvian system that required entering the same data over and over again. There was lost data, inaccurate data, and there were payroll mistakes. I'm pretty sure the user manual was a set of cave wall paintings. It took so long to upload data I could make a complete meal in a microwave, and then there were the phone calls and the complaints from teachers and other staff. You get the picture. A number of us thought we need a new system, so we approached the head of HR and he said, we'll do some research, put together a business case, and he'll take it to the superintendent. I thought, well, this is going to take at least a year to 18 months. Within 6 weeks it was approved and we were given money and 3 directives or key performance indicators from Mike Strambitsky, our superintendent. Fix it so it works, be on time and don't go over budget, and you figure out the rest. That was my first exposure to the culture of the superintendent saying, my result, your process. So we went ahead and implemented the new PeopleSoft HR payroll system on time and under budget in less than a year. A few months later, some staff went to the PeopleSoft conference in California. This was before there was Oracle World and PeopleSoft and the conference that attracts like 16,000 people today. There were about 400 people. No one could believe how we implemented the system that fast with so few resources. Other similar sized companies had spent 5 and 10 times as much and taken 2 years to implement. They also had huge problems in implementation because senior management was micromanaging, departments were fighting with each other, and there was hurdle after hurdle, barrier after barrier. That project was also my first exposure to what could be accomplished in an empowered system. So I stayed with the district and moved into different roles until my last role, where I'm responsible for looking after the operational side of the district. You know, finance, HR, communications, planning and student transportation, facilities, technology, and our foundation. It's my last role because I'll be retiring in the new year. So what does an empowered system look like and feel like from a central perspective and an operational perspective? This is important because at Edmonton Public Schools, we all believe that teaching is a collective responsibility and that the students are at the center of everything we do. We went away from that, and I'll talk about that in our keynote tomorrow. And rest assured, Bruce will also tell you what's working and what's not working. But to illustrate, and being an HR guy at heart, let me share a few examples of the amazing staff who work for us. And please know that if I did this talk 100 times, I could use different examples each time. We really are blessed with the talent we have.